There we go. So first, thank you all so much again for spending your time with the Policy Circle. We know that this is time away from your families, from work, from your home, and so we hope you've enjoyed this experience. And so the theme of this entire time, as you know, has been driving innovation, building thriving communities, and you really cannot do that without the power of creativity. And so we are so lucky here to have Byron Sanders, who is the president and CEO of Big Thought. He's going to talk more about what Big Thought is. And so I'll let you do all that talking. But what I think is really critical is that this is a way to really redefine and unleash creativity to move our communities forward. So without further ado, Byron, why don't you tell the audience, set the scene. Who are you? What is Big Thought? And why is it important today?
Awesome. Really, really happy to be here with you all. And so Big Thought is an organization, it's a little over 30 years old. Started here in Dallas. I say here, we're in Fort Worth. Fort Worth people would be like, that is not true. So yeah, it started in Dallas. And we initially started as an arts education organization. We were part of Young Audiences, fast forward. We're significantly larger and do a range of different things, but the root of it comes down to this. We're here to help close the opportunity gap. When you're looking at the outcomes for young people, those are typically coming from Black and brown communities in the urban settings, concentrated poverty, things like that. We're looking to close the gap between their opportunities and the opportunities of those who might have more resources, because talent is not the deficit here, right? Greatness is not the deficit here. The deficit is opportunities. And that's actually more of an indictment around society as opposed to the individual themselves, which is actually why we don't say achievement gap, we say opportunity gap. So the way that we do that is we build skills ready for a 21st century world. And we call that the creator. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. But the idea is creating creators for a 21st century world. That takes place in non-traditional learning spaces. And so we partner with school districts, cities, municipalities, even county and juvenile systems in order to go to places and spaces so young people get to build those skills that happen as you learn by doing, as you learn by creating. And interestingly enough, we're going to talk about why that's connected to not only their only personal ability to thrive, but also their economic empowerment to thrive too. That's what we do.
That's so great. And Big Thought accomplishes this in a number of different ways, but I kind of want to back up. You mentioned something earlier that when we were chatting was really fascinating, and the idea of reconceptualizing and redefining what is creativity. So why don't you talk a little bit about what that looks like for all of us here in this room and those watching virtually, and how that fits into this picture of Big Thought.
Awesome. So I'm going to start off with a little question for the audience, and you can answer as well. I just can't see you. If I had to ask you by show of hands, who in here would define themselves as creative? Okay, got a few hands up. It's about 4 hands. So I'd say in this room, what is that? We're at like a third, maybe a quarter, something like that. Cool. So I'll tell you about the time that I asked that question. And I was in a room full of CEOs at an organization that was really about entrepreneurship, right? And so all of these CEOs, you can only be here if your business had made so many millions of dollars, blah, 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 blah. So successful folks who have started a business and are doing a thing. I asked the question, 3 people put their hand up in a room of about 50 or so. And I was like, okay, you, sir, why? And he said, I played in a band. I was like, cool. I asked another person, it's like, why are you creative? I'm a photographer. Awesome. I asked somebody else, and it was something else. I forget what he said, but it was something artsy. And I was like, cool. All right, great. Now, let's take a step back and contextualize. I just asked a room full of people who literally created a business that solved a problem that was previously unsolved in a very unique way, and none of y'all, except for the 3, thought they were creative people. And that just illustrates what the problem is when we think about creativity, because What the research is showing, and what the evidence is suggesting, is that creativity is not only something that we all have, but it's also something that you can suppress if you don't have the right kinds of experiences that nurture and build it. And the reason why it's even more important than it ever has been before is because in the world that we're moving into, where with machine learning, artificial intelligence, the algorithms, we are going to need creativity unlike we ever have before. There's a great book that's out. It's been out for a few years, Martin Ford. It's called Rise of the Robots. He's a futurist. And when you look at how things are trending, how the workforce is changing at such a rapid clip, creativity is actually one of the most critical assets that you're going to be able to launch and leverage in order to create financial sustainability for yourself, for your family, and honestly get to the kinds of solutions that we desperately, desperately need. And we can go into a little bit of why, and I'll kind of follow your lead on that, but I'll give you an example of at a macro level how that's showing up. First of all, LinkedIn did a report, 2019, then they did another one in 2020. They were looking at the most desired workforce skills, and they looked across every sector, and LinkedIn has all the sectors. The number one most desired trait for somebody stepping into the workforce today was creativity. Future Jobs Report put out a study. It's the World Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum. Creativity showed up for the first time in the top 10 skill sets most desired for workforce. In 2015, 2020 came, creativity was up to number 3. Right ahead of it, problem solving and critical thinking, which are also domains of creativity. And so you wonder, like, okay, has this always been the case, or is there something else that's happening here? There is something else that's happening. The something else is, because technology is advancing in such a rapid clip, one, it's getting harder and harder for us to predict what skills a person is going to need 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now. There's studies that say today's third grader, when they hit the job market, 60% of what's going to be available for them doesn't exist yet. There's some studies that say it's 80%. Bottom line is things are going so fast, so me as an educator or youth development specialist or something like that, I'm trying to tell you, hey, here's what you're going to need to be successful. I don't know. Maybe. But what I do know is I need to give you the basic skills or the base muscles to be able to step into whatever that nebulous tomorrow is and know how to do something with it and carve out a place for you. The second thing that's happening, things that we used to say, I'm good at this, therefore you should hire me, or therefore I should have a sustainable and ongoing opportunity to work in a certain place. Computational things, right? You know, there's been people who's like, yeah, I'm a great math person, so I'm good at this, right? I'll go be an accountant, all that jazz. What we're finding is that algorithms are taking the place of things that we have historically said a really smart, capable, and trained person is good to do. And that's cutting across every collar job, not just blue collar, it's cutting across white collar, they call it new collar. And the idea is, okay, well then what's my place? If the bot is doing this, and that's what I used to do, then either what I'm gonna now be doing is changing fundamentally, or it's going away. And I gotta learn something different. And the something different always involves your critical thinking, analytical, and creative skills. If we're gonna prepare anybody for work, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Future Jobs Report, LinkedIn, US Department of Labor, they're all saying the same thing. Our skills and what we're defining as 21st century ready has got to shift, and it involves being creative.
So the big question then is how do we do this, right? You know, we are trying to prepare our students and our kids for those jobs that we don't even know, you know, and maybe a few obscure experts, we've talked about this, will be aware and be able to really predict and map this out, but for implementing it in the larger scale, in schools across communities, How do we combat that challenge, and how is Big Thought working on that? And how do we make sure that we are reaching students that are potentially traditionally marginalized or outside of the traditional level of schooling and need something more approachable for their education?
Great question. So how many of it, anybody have kids in school right now? Cool. Public school kids, anybody got public school kids? All right, cool. So you guys know exactly the burst of creativity that comes with getting ready for a standardized test, right? That's kind of the challenge that we're going through as a society right now. It was a good idea when they brought the idea that, hey, we need to ensure that there is a standard level of learning that's happening across the country from Anchorage to Miami. We need to make sure every kid gets a high quality education. Okay, well, how do you do that? Well, we probably got to test it. Okay, well, what are we testing? Well, we probably need to come up with some standards. Okay, cool. So now we have standards. But what's happened is, anybody who's been paying attention knows that we've gotten to a place where sometimes it feels like the tail is wagging the dog. And we have sculpted school around hitting, in Texas, we call them TEKS, Texas Essential Knowledge Skills. TEK 3.3A or whatever, right? Today is this specific objective, and we're gonna go through it, and school is literally wedged into this box. Learning is wedged into this box that's being driven by standardized testing. And we're deep, y'all. I mean, No Child Left Behind isn't even the thing anymore, but we're still here. So, what do you do in that world? Well, what you do, we're starting to see this happen in places all over the country. One, we are seeing a burst of innovation around high school models. And I'm excited about seeing that. I'll give you a couple of examples of what that looks like. Actually, Iowa is a state that a lot of folks should be looking at right now because they tried to hack the game. They said, okay, standards are important, clearly, but we also know these other skills are really important, so they put those skills as standards in their state codified education requirement, right? And then eventually somebody built a school model called Iowa Big that actually enacts and puts these 21st century skill standards into a high school model that takes learning out of the classroom. So now it's part of your learning process to go out and work, to go out and solve a problem, to come up with your own project, those kinds of things, right? That kind of dynamic learning, that's happening. In Dallas, actually, Dallas ISD, we have a system called P-TECH that we do. It didn't originate here, but it blew up here, where career or corporate partners like AT&T will come in and pipeline what are non-traditional standards that kids need to know that they can learn to be ready for my jobs. And it actually puts them on a pathway toward college credit. So many of these kids are graduating with essentially an associate's degree, and the ability to go into non-traditional learning spaces because they might have an actual degreed or post-secondary certificate leaving the door, and they're stepping right in there. But they did that learning by doing, because they're literally going and doing in these companies and corporations that are partners with the school. So that's another model. But we got to do this at bigger scale, and we got to go faster. Here's an interesting thing. We talked about this, right? We have a common hobby.
I don't know if we should tell them.
Let's go ahead and do it.
Should we break out into song?
We almost did.
We love musical theater, for those not picking up.
So, do it. I might. Growing up, my mom worked just like so many parents do, and she's got 2 young kids, and she had to go to work during the summer, and she needed to figure out a place to put me and my brother, right? And I ended up doing theater because of that, because it was free, close, and boy, don't break my stuff at home, here, go, right? So now I'm in this thing, and I'm doing theater, and I love it. Now, I've been in football and track and all this stuff, just typical stuff, but I'm in theater, and I love it. Fast forward 30 years. I'm speaking on a stage to 5,000 people, and I did a decent job at it. I got off stage, and a person asked me, he's like, where did you learn how to tell that story? He's like, you did a great job. How did you learn it? And I was reflective, and I thought, actually, it was because I was in 3 consecutive summers of theater because my mom needed a place to take me and to put me. Now, that skill set has served me extraordinarily well my entire life. I've used it in sales, marketing. I've used it as a fundraiser, as the executive director for the Dallas Education Foundation. I've done it in a range of different ways, and you have as well, right? But when I was in it, my mom wasn't like, hey, son, I'm gonna need you to build a 21st century skill, okay? So I'm gonna put you in theater. But these skills are actually being built all around us. They're being built in the coding camp, in the leadership initiative that the kids got involved with at Student Council. They're being built in the service project. They're being built by a young lady who has to be the principal translator for her family because everybody's an immigrant, and she's literally building the skill set of empathy, connecting, building relationships, and all that stuff. But the problem is, all of these skills are being built in all these places, but where are we capturing them? How are kids knowing that this is now what I have in my toolkit? How are kids being able to then apply them to a specific thing that's actually going to deepen the knowledge and deepen the muscle? That's the thing that we don't have, but that's the thing that we're working on at Big Thought, and that's why we created something called the creator archetype. The creator archetype has essentially mapped 21st century skills building. And what we have done is we've taken this range of different skills and we've broken them down into 5 different domains. The biggest one is social and emotional skills. It's the skill set of humans, right? Self-awareness, social awareness, relationship building, responsible decision making, right? Those are the things that a person has to build as a skill. We call it emotional intelligence, EQ, all of that. That's the first domain. The second is academic and artistry. That's everything that happens between 8 and 3 in your classes. The third, digital fluency, coding, robotics, digital wisdom, knowing how to engage with the internet, right? Data analytics, data literacy. The third big domain is design thinking. So human-centered design, how to take something from inception all the way to execution. And then the last one is civics and service, understanding that my actions absolutely have an effect on somebody else's, and that I need to take that in consideration. Building skills in those different domains, that equips a young person for this 21st century world. Now, what we have at Big Thought is we manage large ecosystems with hundreds of partners in out-of-school time and non-traditional learning spaces. We build those ecosystems so we're capturing the data, spreading best practices, and executing, rowing in one single direction. Now, we're layering that mapping onto all of the partners that we have working with us. So the St. John's Missionary Baptist Church guy knows that, yes, we're building skills in theater, and also in that same credential that a young person would get by coming to this program, it now lists the distinct 21st century skill sets that were built. That's the ecosystem that we are now launching and going live with, that we've been working on since 2014. If we can do this well, and we will, then now we have something that has as much rigor, structure, visibility, and plug-in ability as a person's GPA and transcript that they get in the traditional school day. So now we have the ability to tell the whole story of what a young person does, and they have the ability to have respect and, quite frankly, the connectivity of knowing why I'm doing a thing as a young person on the learning journey. We call that learning pathways, but it's all designed and mapped to this creator archetype.
It's fantastic. And I think you mentioned a really key point of it being transferable. So I want to ask one more question to you before we turn it to the audience. So ladies, get your questions ready. And I'll bring the microphone to you so our virtual audience can hear you. But you know, the policy circle community and every single person in this room, and I'm sure watching virtually, you know, we really focus on, you know, discovering the problems and generating solutions and having that call to action. We see this in our programming, we see this in our products in the policy circle briefs. So if you could tell the audience here today, you know, those skills that will help it transfer into their local communities, you know, what is the call to action here? How can we unleash creativity, continue to drive this innovation? And you know, you're a father, your wife was an educator. I mean, how does that impact what you're doing and potentially our audience members today?
Awesome. One, love that y'all are even entertaining the conversation, because it's one that we need to hurry up with, because quite frankly, the technology is moving way faster than we have gotten ahead of it. I just came back from a conference that had some really creepy stuff with AI. So what we need is a shift in priorities. I think that we have a collective understanding of public education that is not necessarily aligned with the world as it actually is post-school. It's not just algebra, it's not just knowing history, it's not just SAT scores, right? It's not just ACT. It's about building a skill set that can then be applicable. So what we need is policy pressure to start to embrace things like what I mentioned in Iowa that reprioritizes what's important in our schools. We need new standards. We need a redefinition of what's important, because so goes the policy, so goes what the focus is going to be. A lot of educators are not doing this stuff or focusing on the test because they just love tests. Matter of fact, that's why a lot of people are leaving the sector, right? But they are, and when I say they, I'm talking about the teachers, principals, superintendents, sometimes feel powerless to reshape things the way they need to go. So we need policy remedies that prioritize 21st century skills, that prioritize, yes, social and emotional skills. And we're not running away from those because of some misinformation that's out there. So advocacy at that level is critically important. The second thing, while we're waiting on Godot, theater reference for anybody. While we're waiting, here we go. That's a good one. While we're waiting on and trying to get change at the high level policy space, what we need is for folks to make significant investments in ecosystems of out of school time experiences. And when I say ecosystems, I mean more than just a great program, right? It's more important that we have things everywhere in a city as opposed to having a beautiful gym or a diamond in the rough here or there. There's some great work that Big Thought, our organization, is in the middle of, but in cities across the country, there are these intermediary organizations that allow an entire ecosystem to move forward in a particular direction. Finding those and making significant investments in time and your connections to those places and spaces help us create more of these 21st century skills building opportunities for young people who otherwise wouldn't have had access to them. Because as a dad, I sent the kids my summer to camp. We just went to Oxford this past summer, right? That's serving them extraordinarily well. And it's not just for experience and exposure. I'm actually literally building skills for my young people to be successful in the future. So what we need is for folks to advocate for, like I said, 21st century skills development as the thing, and two, make investments in out of school time ecosystems that really move this stuff forward. The last thing I'll say, and I'll say this because because I have the mic. Social emotional learning. We're in an unprecedented mental health crisis on our planet right now, period, across the board. There is a movement that is actually against social and emotional learning right now. And it's being tied to some things that don't make a lot of sense on the surface and actually are not necessarily accurately rooted in truth. One, you will hear, is that social emotional learning has become a Trojan horse to critical race theory in our public education systems. if you look at the evidence that some of these folks cite, is far-fetched at best. But I'm gonna tell you this. Justice demands that we create social emotional learning opportunities for young people at every school across the entire country. Social emotional learning is not about brainwashing or anything like that. What it's about is building the human interaction skills that our young people need. And it's about building resilience. Social emotional learning is not coddling kids, it's actually the opposite. It's about power. Because a classroom goes completely differently if the kids in that classroom know how to regulate themselves. They know how to control themselves and manage themselves. They know how to take a traumatic thing that's happening in their world, put it in the right context, and move forward and through it. Bring the things that makes them stronger and leave the stuff that hurts them behind. That's what social emotional learning does. It's also the root of somebody being able to be successful in their business and earning careers down the line too. So I need an army of folks who value our social and emotional development. We have to hold the line because it's under attack at a national, state, and local level. And I'm pleading with people to join that fight. CASEL, C-A-S-E-L, is a wonderful organization. They are the research basis for a lot of social and emotional development. And as the critical skill of the creator archetype, we recognize it's something that's good for our own well-being, but also for reinvesting in our communities. So that's the other thing. They have policy briefs that are available. I'll share some.
Yeah, we'll have to exchange our briefs then.
And then hopefully people can kind of get in this fight and advocate for it in their local communities and at a state and federal level too.
Well, you know, I'm keeping an eye on time, and I really want you all to have a chance to ask your questions. So why don't we see, I'll jump up here and pass the mic. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We may be able to bundle them. Anyone here want to dive in? Okay, yes, we've got here, sorry, videographer. All right, we'll pass the mic to you.
Hi, I really, really love what you're talking about. Myself, I grew up in a disadvantaged community. I grew up in the 3rd Ward down in Houston. I was zoned to Jack Yates High School, but the HISD programs have things called magnet schools, which kind of allow students to step outside of their initial community and seek out better opportunities and better schooling. However, we know in disadvantaged communities, specifically in the Black community, along with in rural communities, there are very limited opportunities for students. A lot of times people are told that you have to be good at sports or you have to be good at XYZ and you have to be marketable in order to make money and be somebody. So how do we change, and a lot of times when it comes to like testing, right? Like it's not that like the teaching is poor, it's that the students are bad. And it's like they don't care and this like idea behind it. So how do we change the heart in those schools, from the educators all the way up to the students themselves, where they believe that they can actually like achieve something really, really good and beneficial for their community, while at the same time enjoying the things that they love. So being a multifaceted student who may be an amazing athlete, but also has an amazing skill in understanding biology or statistics or XYZ. So how do we get to that point? How do we, as just individuals, go into our communities, if you have any thoughts there?
Thank you for asking that question. The first thing to acknowledge is that we have to start to shift beliefs, right? And that comes in conversations, that comes in relationship with people, and starting to talk about these things and reframe them. That's why literally part of our organization strategy at Big Thought is reframe belief on creativity and what it is. The second thing is, I think it is important for us to stop individualizing and personalizing a young person's lack of success in school. Yes, effort matters. Yes, applying yourself matters. But we have to take into account the bigger picture. And if we realize that in this community, for generations, we've had the same struggles over and over and over again, you have to acknowledge that whether somebody moved there or whether they grew up there, there is a systemic issue. So we need systemic solutions to give people systemically more opportunities in order to be their best selves. I say all of that because if we start to say and acknowledge that institutional inequity has led to the lack of an ability for a person to have the right kind of nutrition, or even earlier, maternal access to health care, that has an effect on a young person's ability to step into a school and do well. If we don't have safe communities, that kid is not really interested in your, what sound C makes, because they were thinking about, what am I gonna do right after school? Which route am I gonna take home that is the safest and that's not gonna potentially end my life? We have to start to decontextualize. We have to put context to our young people's challenges that they're dealing with. So I start there because opportunity gap matters way more than achievement gap does. I go back to that conversation. The second thing is, when you think about what achievement means, we have to shift the understanding of the point of school. School is not here just to get good grades. That is not the point of it. The point of school should be to give young people the equipment for them to become a healthy, whole person with goals, and that they have the opportunity to have a larger time horizon for their decisions. Here's what concentrated poverty does. You're trying to talk to a 7th grader about 10 years from now. If you are in concentrated poverty, whether you're in rural or urban settings, you're thinking about today. You're thinking about next week. You don't have the ability or the luxury, quite frankly, of having a 10-year from now conversation. So if I'm being serious and honest, then what are the things that I can do to change the systems that my young people are living in, including their housing, all of these things, right? Their housing, healthcare, nutrition, all of that. And I'm providing moments along the way for them to get some sort of return on the investment of the time that they're putting in. Because kids need to have a link to relevance. I'll tell you what we're doing. We're actually starting to pay kids. We're paying young people for doing out-of-school time work. An example of this is in Creative Solutions. It's actually a program that we do with the juvenile justice system. These kids come to us on probation, 13 to 18. 7 weeks over the summer, we pay them as working artists. So they're producing either a play or a visual arts gallery display, and they get a stipend for doing it. At the end of it, yeah, they've produced this amazing thing, and they probably have a new artistic skill, but what they also have are some brand new trauma-informed social and emotional skills that are serving them extraordinarily well for the rest of their lives. We paid them, why? Because we all want to get paid, quite frankly, and if you're poor, you need money. And so that's the first reason why you came. You weren't thinking about all of the extra stuff that you're going to get for it. You got that after you came, but let's start talking to the relevance of why kids would do a thing in the first place. We keep asking 16-year-olds to show up, and they're like, well, I need to help with rent, right? So how can we start to loop those into youth experiences, both in school and out of school? Economic and financial resources are actually part of it. So that's another thing that I would say we need to start to embrace at large as well.
We've got one more question here. Okay, is this working? Byron, I'm so grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. Last night we heard from a keynote speaker, Ian Rowe, who's written a book called Agency. And what you're describing as social and emotional capability is really what he describes as agency, giving the individual student the agency to make these forward-looking decisions. And one of the things about not-for-profit organizations is, are we taking advantage of all the opportunities to collaborate? And when we learn about something like agency, which sounds like what Castle is doing around social and emotional learning, are we connecting the dots?
That is a great question. Largely, so there are some really interesting collaborations that are starting to happen. And we need more to happen at broader scale and faster. the collaboration, just to illustrate, we have something here called Dallas City of Learning. Over 200 different organizations have come together, and they are sharing a common definition of what quality means in out-of-school time spaces, which includes social emotional learning and the creative assets that we're talking about. We're starting to do that at large now, and we're rolling that out to the tunes of, there's about 50,000 young people that are affected by this ecosystem. If we're all doing the same thing and speaking a common language, that's good. Now the problem is you have these big providers of experiences like the Dallas Public Library or Parks and Rec, and then you have the mom and pop shop that are down here in one place in South Dallas. Wouldn't it be great if they were all speaking the language and marching to the same tune? That's why these intermediary organizations really make sense, because it connects the dots between the people who fly at a large level and those who have 50 kids but consistently have those same 50 kids over and over and over again. The collaboration has to take place in those places, and the channel and pipeline for that to move through the community is through these intermediary organizations like Big Thought, whose explicit job is to coordinate, communicate, provide the connectivity and the synapses firing among everybody at the same time. So that's why I share that. And Castle is this big thing that exists, out of Chicago, and they speak to folks all over the place. They can't do what we do in Dallas. They can't do what they're doing in Tulsa, right? The intermediaries are a critical piece of this pie.
Back on. We just want to thank you for the amazing work you're doing, and I want to really just empower all of you to check out Big Thought. I learned a lot on their website, and I know that we are going to be looking to continue to drive and unleash creativity to really foster human flourishing. That's what we're all about. So with that, unfortunately, we are out of time. I know we could probably sit and talk to you all day. To our virtual audience, thank you for tuning in. You can check out more at thepolicycircle.org. Please tag us, share more of this. And thank you to The Modern for hosting us. So we are actually going to go tour The Modern for just a little bit on your own. It's a self-guided walkabout. Beth McQueen has tickets. We've got about 25 minutes. So please meet down here in the lobby where you came in. 25 minutes. We want to get you on the bus. We don't want to lose you. So stick with a buddy, and we will be floating around as well. Let's give it up for Byron. Thank you so much again.
Thank y'all.